The first thing I saw when I came back to town wasn't my mother's face. It was a sold sign in front of my childhood home. I had been away for 6 years. 6 years without a birthday call from my father. 6 years of my brother telling relatives I had chosen money over family. 6 years of my mother occasionally sending photographs of the house as if nothing had ever happened. And now there was a stranger's name on the mailbox. I stood across the street with my suitcase beside me, staring at the porch where I had spent every summer of my childhood. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. "Where are you?" I looked at the sold sign. "I'm home." There was a pause. Then she said something that made absolutely no sense. "Good. We were hoping you'd come back this week." I looked at the house again. "Why?" "Your father wants to have dinner." I almost laughed. 6 years of silence. A sold house. And suddenly my father wanted dinner. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner was going to expose a secret my family had kept from me for years. And the strangest part? They were going to discover that the one thing they thought I had lost forever was the one thing I had spent 6 years protecting. When I was 28, my father gave me a choice: stay in the family business or leave. There was no third option. The family business was a small chain of specialty furniture stores my grandfather had started with 1 rented storefront and 2 delivery trucks. My father eventually expanded it to 4 locations. My older brother, Daniel, was supposed to inherit everything. Everyone knew that. I was never supposed to be part of the succession plan. I was the daughter who handled the things nobody noticed: inventory systems, supplier negotiations, accounting problems, customer complaints, the boring work. Daniel handled the photographs, the advertisements, the meetings, the speeches. He was the face. I was the machinery underneath it. And for years, I didn't mind. Until I discovered something in the company books that changed everything. One of our largest suppliers had been overbilling us. Not by a few $1,000s. By nearly $600,000 over 4 years. I traced the invoices, then the bank transfers, then the vendor's ownership records. The supplier was partly owned by a company registered to my brother's best friend. I confronted Daniel. He told me I was misunderstanding the paperwork. I showed him the transfers. He stopped smiling. Then he told me to forget I had seen them. I went to my father. He didn't ask whether the numbers were correct. He asked me one question. "How much money do you think your brother has invested in keeping this family together?" I didn't understand. He did. He wanted me to understand that exposing Daniel would embarrass the family. I told him the company was losing money. He told me families sometimes had to absorb losses. That was the first time I realized something. My father wasn't protecting the business. He was protecting Daniel. 2 weeks later, I was fired. The official explanation was irreconcilable differences. The family explanation was worse. My father told relatives that I had become obsessed with numbers and had tried to accuse my brother of stealing. Daniel told everyone I had threatened to destroy the company. My mother said nothing. I left town. I never went back. I moved to Seattle with 2 suitcases and $4,700. I rented a tiny apartment above a bakery. For the first 6 months, I worked for an accounting firm. Then a client asked me to investigate irregularities in one of their warehouses. I found $180,000 in unexplained losses. That investigation became another, then another. Within 3 years, I was running a forensic accounting consultancy. I specialized in finding money that disappeared between the numbers. Companies hired me when their books looked clean, but something felt wrong. I became very good at it, not because I was naturally brilliant, because I had learned the most important lesson from my own family. People rarely hide things in the places you expect. They hide them inside ordinary paperwork, a routine invoice, a harmless transfer, a company with a boring name, a signature nobody questions. I built my entire career around that principle, and eventually, I became successful enough that I stopped thinking about my family every day, not because I forgave them, because they became irrelevant. Or so I thought. Then, 6 years after I left, my mother called, and I came home. The house was empty. The buyer had already moved in. I stood outside for 10 minutes before I noticed something taped beneath the mailbox. A small envelope. My name was written on it. Not my married name, not my business name, my childhood name, the one my father used before everything went wrong. I opened it. Inside was a single key and a note. You were right about the books. Nothing else. No signature. I read it 3 times. Then I called my mother. She answered immediately. Did you find it? Who wrote this? Silence. Mom? She whispered. Not here. Where? Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Why? Another pause. Then she said, because your father doesn't know I kept it. She hung up. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, because I was curious. What had my mother kept? And why had she waited 6 years to give it to me? The next evening, she met me in the parking lot of an old library. She looked older than I remembered. Smaller. She handed me a folder. Inside were copies of invoices, bank statements, vendor agreements, and photographs. I recognized the supplier immediately. The same supplier I had investigated 6 years earlier. But there was something I hadn't known. The company I believed belonged to Daniel's friend had actually been created by my father. The friend was only the name on the paperwork. My father's money had funded it. My brother had been using the supplier to move money out of the family business. But there was more. My father had known, and he hadn't simply allowed it. He had designed the arrangement. I looked at my mother. How long have you known? Since before you left. My throat tightened. You knew? She nodded. Your father told me Daniel needed time. Time for what? She looked at the folder. To fix it. Did he? No. That was the first honest answer my mother had given me in 6 years. Then she reached into her bag. I kept something else. She gave me a small USB drive. Your father thought he destroyed it. I stared at it. What is it? An audio recording. My mother looked directly into my eyes. And you're not going to like what you hear. I took the drive back to my hotel. I didn't play it immediately. I made a forensic copy first. Old habits. Then I opened the recording. The first voice I heard was my father's. This cannot come out. Then Daniel. She won't stop. My father's voice again. Then make sure she leaves. My hands went cold. The recording continued. Daniel was asking what would happen if I went to the bank. My father answered, she'll destroy the family. Then Daniel said, what if she tells people? My father's answer was quiet. People believe the version that sounds expensive. I stopped the recording. That sentence stayed with me. Because that was exactly what had happened. They had never needed to prove I was wrong. They only needed to make my version expensive enough for everyone else to ignore. But the recording wasn't the real surprise. The final 2 minutes contained something neither of them realized had been captured. My father's lawyer entered the room. He placed a document on the table, and he said, "She doesn't own the property." I leaned closer. "What property?" Then I heard my father's voice. "The house. My childhood home. The house that had just been sold." The lawyer continued, "If she comes back, she may have a claim." My father replied, "She doesn't know about the trust." I paused the recording. A trust? What trust? My grandfather had created a family property trust 24 years earlier. The house was one of its assets. So was the original furniture warehouse. The trust document said something very specific. The property could not be sold unless all three beneficiaries approved the transaction: my father, Daniel, and me. I had never known I was a beneficiary. That meant the house had potentially been sold without my consent. I contacted an attorney. She spent 2 days reviewing the records. Then she called me. "You need to come in." I went to her office. She had the trust agreement open on her desk. "Your father didn't sell the house." I stared at her. "Then who did?" She pointed to a company. Daniel's holding company. My brother had transferred the property to a shell company. Then the shell company sold it. The buyer had no idea there was a dispute, but the money had already moved. My attorney looked at me. "There's another problem." "What?" "The house isn't the most valuable asset." She turned another page. "The trust owns the original warehouse. The warehouse where my grandfather had started the entire business. My father had recently announced plans to demolish it. The property had been rezoned. A developer was prepared to build a luxury apartment complex, and my brother had already received a deposit. I suddenly understood why my mother had called. My family wasn't inviting me home because they missed me. They were inviting me home because they needed something: my signature. The dinner invitation arrived the next morning. My father wrote it himself. 7 o'clock, family dinner. We have something important to discuss. I smiled. Of course they did. I hired my attorney. Then I called the developer. I didn't accuse anyone. I asked a simple question. "Who did you purchase the warehouse from?" They gave me the name, Daniel's Holding Company. I asked whether they had reviewed the trust agreement. Silence. Then, "What trust agreement?" "Exactly." They didn't know. I didn't tell them everything. I only asked them to pause the transaction until their attorneys could review the title. The deal froze. Then I did something my father couldn't have predicted. I contacted the bank that had financed the warehouse project. I gave them copies of the documents. They immediately suspended the next draw. Within 48 hours, Daniel's entire development plan was stuck. He called me. For the first time in 6 years. "Please don't do this." I almost didn't recognize his voice. "Do what?" "You know exactly what." "No, Daniel. I know exactly what you did." He went quiet. Then he said, "Dad made me." That sentence told me more than any confession could. Because Daniel was 42 years old. He wasn't a child. He had made his choices. But he wasn't the person I wanted to punish. My father was. And even then, I wasn't sure punishment was what I wanted. I wanted the truth. At 7 o'clock, I walked into my parents' house. The dining room looked exactly the same. Same chandelier, same silverware, same painting above the fireplace, even the same chairs. My father was at the head of the table. Daniel sat beside him. My mother sat across from me, and on the table was a folder. My father smiled. "You've done well for yourself." I didn't respond. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit." I sat. Dinner began. Nobody mentioned the warehouse. Nobody mentioned the trust. Nobody mentioned the recording. Instead, my father talked about family. He talked about my grandfather. He talked about tradition. Then he said, "We want to rebuild what was lost." I almost laughed. My father pushed the folder toward me. "There's an opportunity." I opened it. A proposal. They wanted me to invest in Daniel's new development company. My father had apparently decided that I was now successful enough to finance the next generation. He looked proud. "You understand business." I closed the folder. "Do you know who owns the warehouse?" His smile disappeared. "What?" "The warehouse." Daniel looked at my father. My father looked back at me. I continued, "Because according to the trust agreement, neither of you could sell it without my approval." Nobody spoke. I placed a copy of the trust agreement on the table. Then another document. The developer's purchase agreement. Then the bank's suspension notice. Daniel looked sick. My father didn't move. Finally he said, "You don't understand what you're doing." I looked at him. "I understand exactly what I'm doing." Then I placed the USB drive on the table. My mother's face went white. My father's eyes went directly to it. I pressed play. His own voice filled the dining room. "This cannot come out." Daniel stood up. "Where did you get that?" I looked at my mother. She didn't answer. My father did. "You recorded us?" "No." I paused the audio. "Mom did." My father turned toward her. For the first time in my life, I saw him speechless. My mother was crying. But she didn't apologize. She simply said, "I was tired of being afraid." My father tried to explain. He said the money had been temporary. He said Daniel had made mistakes. He said the business was under pressure. He said I had been young. He said family businesses were complicated. He said he thought he was protecting everyone. I listened. Then I asked him one question. "If you believed you were right, why did you lie?" He couldn't answer. That was the moment the room changed. Because everybody knew. The argument wasn't about money anymore. It was about the lie. My father had spent 6 years telling people I had abandoned my family. But I hadn't. I had been forced out. He had built an entire version of reality where he was the victim. And now the evidence was sitting between us. My brother finally spoke. I was going to tell her. My father looked at him. "When?" Daniel didn't answer. I looked at my brother. "You could have told me 6 years ago." I was scared. So was I. He looked down, and for the first time, I realized we had both spent years afraid of the same man. We had simply chosen different ways to survive him. I had one final document. I placed it on the table. My father looked at it. "What is that?" "The warehouse." He stared. "You can't take it." "I don't want it." That confused him. I continued. "The trust allows the beneficiaries to restructure ownership. My attorney had prepared the paperwork. The warehouse would not go to me. It wouldn't go to Daniel. It wouldn't go to my father. I was transferring my interest into a community foundation. The original building would be preserved. The ground floor would become a business incubator for local entrepreneurs. The upper floors would become affordable studio space for small businesses. The family name would not appear anywhere. My father stared at the document. "You're giving it away?" "Yes." "After everything?" I nodded. He couldn't understand. Because he thought the entire story was about ownership. It wasn't. It was about control. And I had finally realized that the best way to escape someone else's control was to stop wanting the thing they wanted you to fight over. My father had spent years teaching me that everything had a price. I had finally learned that some things become more valuable when you refuse to sell them. I signed. Then I stood. Dinner was over. My mother followed me to the porch. Rain had started. She looked at me. I should have protected you. I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, yes. She nodded. I know. It was the first apology she had ever given me. Not, I'm sorry you felt hurt. Not, I was trying to keep the peace. Just, I should have protected you. I appreciated the honesty, but I didn't suddenly become the daughter who could forget 6 years. Forgiveness isn't a switch. Sometimes it's simply deciding that the other person's choices no longer get to control your future. My mother asked, "Will you come back?" I looked at the house. I don't know. She nodded. And this time, she didn't ask me to promise. That mattered. 3 months later, the warehouse was under renovation. The developer was gone. The bank had been repaid. Daniel resigned from the family business. He eventually started a smaller company of his own. My father retired. He didn't apologize publicly. He probably never will. Some people would say that means I didn't get justice. Maybe they're right. But something strange happened after I left that dinner. I stopped checking. I stopped wondering what my father told people. I stopped asking my mother whether he had changed. I stopped imagining the conversation where he finally admitted I was right. For 6 years, I thought winning meant making my family admit what they had done. Now I understand. Winning was becoming someone who didn't need the admission anymore. The warehouse is almost finished. The first group of entrepreneurs will move in next spring. There's no Hayes name on the building. No statue. No plaque. Just a small sign near the entrance. Built for people starting over. I like that. Because that's exactly what I did. I started over. And the thing my family thought they had taken from me was never the business. It was never the house. It was never the money. It was never even the truth. What they almost took was my belief that I could build a life without their permission. They failed. And I think that's the part they will never understand. They didn't lose me because I became successful. They lost me because I finally learned that being their daughter did not require me to remain their possession. I went home once to get the truth. I left with something much better. A life that didn't need their approval.